Critical Role Recap Season 2, Episode 72. I missed a couple weeks for recapping due to being on vacation, so I figured I would just summarize the last 2 episodes pretty quickly here at the beginning of this recap. Last we left off, the Mighty Nein had just lost Yasha behind the door with the laughing hand, where it seemed like Yasha had been brought over to the dark side, thanks to the abyssal demon Oban that they had been giving chase to for quite some time. And Ashley has left the group, the core play group, and we are left Yasha-less for now. After they managed to get their way out of the King's Cage, where they left Yasha and the Laughing Hand behind, they spoke with the Queen of Rosanna, the Bright Queen, and they made their way back to Rosanna, where they reported to the Bright Queen on all of the happenings. They told her that they had failed to capture this person, Oban, but they did kill him sort of temporarily. However, in this process, a new evil was unleashed upon the world. And so the Bright Queen had begun to take measures to try and see what they could do to prevent this creature from wreaking havoc upon the country and its people. And the Mighty Nein asked if they could be given leave to pursue one of the leads that they had through Caduceus's visions of this kiln and the 2 pieces of this sword that they found. The Bright Queen says, we are still grateful for what you've done for us, and we appreciate your help. However, we can't exactly commit more resources to your cause, but yes, you have our leave to go pursue this in whatever way you seem fit. Please keep us, keep in contact and let us know what happens. They then went back to the Jor house, where we learned some more about Caduceus Clay's backstory, and we learned that his family is a part of this larger community. They have the Clays, the Stones, and the Dusts. And apparently the Dusts are the ones that were responsible for the forging and stuff, and are connected to the kiln up in the mountains that he keeps seeing visions of. And then they decided to wait for Bo's mentor, Dairon, to come back to the Jor house so that Bo could have a conversation with her and figure out what exactly they should do next. And that was the end of episode 70, with 71 picking up immediately with Dairon showing up and there being a conversation with Dairon and Bo and Jester, where they fill Dairon in on all the things that they've learned and what they've been doing. And Dairon asks for a little bit of assistance in getting in touch with some of the contacts that they've made. Also asks for one of the sigils that they have from the Bright Queen, but they decide better of that and think that it could be dangerous for them to hand over one of their sigils, just in case Dairon does get caught with this sigil. There could be easily tracked back to the Mighty Nein. Dairon says that she is similar to Bo and the Mighty Nein in that she's working for civilization in general and not working on a specific side of this conflict, and is simply trying to help as many people as possible. And so Dairon isn't in a direct conflict with Bo based on the actions of the Mighty Nein at this moment, and they kind of split ways, both just saying, keep in touch and we'll try and continue to work on this situation from our own ends. So after that, the Mighty Nein decide to take a little bit of time to reunite Naught's family, because her son Luke is now safely in Nicodranus with Jester's mother, and they have retrieved Naught's husband from the jail, and he has been sitting in the Jor house for a while now, just kind of bumbling around, not really doing much. So they decide to go ahead and use Caleb's teleportation spell to teleport back to the tower with the first mage that Caleb had made contact with, and where he first started to learn about teleportation. So they return Naught to their family and have a bunch of nice moments. Episode 71 is a whole lot of character development and really just kind of RPing. There is no combat whatsoever, and there are actually very few rolls that are even made, so it's mostly just conversations happening and a few decisions being made. Specifically, the main decision that gets made is Naught does decide to leave her family in Nicodranus in the relative safety that they're in and rejoin the Mighty Nein on their quest, because Naught still doesn't feel safe returning to her home, returning to her family, given the fact that she has to continue to cast an illusion spell to make herself look like the way that her son believes her to be, which is as a halfling as opposed to the goblin that she is now. So Naught decides to stay with the Mighty Nein to continue to help them and to try and look for a way to turn herself back to the way she was permanently through Caleb's knowledge of magic and spells. After that, they also decide to go ahead and stick with the original plan of following Caduceus and figuring out and trying to reforge this sword, which they believe can help them in dealing with the Laughing Hand and in other matters in the future as well. It's also the only solid hunch that they have right now, so they agree to go ahead and help Caduceus with that. All of the Mighty Nein, with the exception of Yasha, of course, as she's no longer part of the group for now at least, make it back to Rosanna and request some help from Essek in teleporting as near to this kiln in the mountains as they can. So they group up with Essek, and he casts teleportation, and after a little bit of a blunder, they do manage to get themselves to this new location, mountaintops in this new area that's covered in snow with a volcanic mountain in the center of it, basically, and they find themselves in yet a new area where another map is drawn up for them. Essek says, okay, have fun, and takes off back to Rosanna, and the Mighty Nein find themselves looking out over a great lake at a volcano in the distance. And that's where episode 71 ends and 72 picks up. So in episode 72, the Mighty Nein have just landed themselves in this new area and begin to make their way towards the volcano. As they do so, this lake is completely iced over, and they debate whether they should go over it or possibly swim under it. They see an entity as they approach this lake, and Caduceus realizes that there is some undead presence around them. However, they don't seem to actually pose a threat. They're just kind of creepy and weird. So Jester, of course, begins reading Tusk Love to the ghosts as they decide to walk around the frozen lake towards the volcano. Jester and Caleb turn into eagles in order to fly the rest of the party over the mountain in order to get to the volcano once they've made it around the lake. They all manage to get over this mountain that's in their way and find themselves next to the billowing smoke vent that is coming up, and they find a carved out entrance into this building, into this volcano. Inside, they find a dwarven lady who is of the Dust family. And so Caduceus merrily greets her with a big hug, and they exchange some information where Caduceus learns that some of his other family members have recently visited, also seeming to be looking for something, but not really knowing what it is that they're searching for. So apparently the whole Clay family has been getting visions of this kiln and has some sort of idea that they're supposed to be there. Caduceus has the upper hand in that he has had help and that he has found these two sword pieces that seem to be directly linked with this vision that the Wild Mother keeps showing him. The dwarven Jeremiz Dust, the lady that they first meet, invites out some of her other family, and they meet Tyla Dust, who is the lore keeper, and so they exchange some information with her as well. Caleb gets to read a little bit of the backstory. Bo reads some dwarven etchings that are all over the forge that talk about the different people who have forged and the different weapons that have been forged there in that kiln. Because inside this area is a molten lava forge, essentially. They're using the lava from the volcano and some magical tools, and the forge itself is magically enchanted in some way. And they have been using this for generations now in order to craft all sorts of weaponry. It's brought up that the Clays were looking for some sort of glass, some sort of green glass that they needed. That rings a bell for Nott, who then thinks of the residuum that they have, the about 1,000 GP worth of residuum that they picked up a while back. And when she brings out the dust, it does indeed look quite similar to, it is the same color that was described to them as far as this glass that the Clay family was looking for. They attempt to melt the powder down into a more liquid substance in order to create a solid out of it or something, in order to try and use it to begin reforging this sword. However, when they place the residuum inside the crucible, it doesn't melt no matter how hot it gets. And they even try applying some catalyst to it to help it melt as well, and nothing really seems to work. So they speak with the dust some more and go ahead and give up on melting the residuum down themselves. And Clay goes ahead and communes with the Wild Mother to ask 3 questions. He asks, am I supposed to be searching for the residuum? Which the general response is yes, that's what he's supposed to be doing. Is Whitestone the closest place to find this refined residuum that they seem to need? The Wild Mother responds, no. Will I find the man that we need to reforge this sword in Uthadurn? And she says yes. So they now know that they need to go to Uthadurn and that they're on the right path also, as far as the Wild Mother's concerned, as far as getting the Star Razor reforged goes. After that, they ask for if there's a place where they can rest, and the Mighty Nein are shown to an area where they can indeed spend the night and get some much needed rest after their journey. They all start to wind down for bed. It's at this point that Jester and Ford have a conversation where Ford Ford asks if she could send a message to Vandrin for him and just tell Vandrin that he's okay and that Ford is looking for him. So Ford takes on the image of Vandrin via his magic, and Jester goes ahead and sends a message. Vandrin responds back kind of vaguely and basically just says, "Oh, hey Ford, haven't heard from him in a while. I'm on an island someplace I think Ford would like." And so Ford is pretty discouraged by this because it seems like, well, apparently Vandrin hasn't been searching for him, despite the fact that Ford has been searching for Vandrin. And Vandrin doesn't also seem to care too much about actually meeting up with him again, as he gives some vague idea, like an island somewhere. Jester tells Ford that maybe he was being vague because he doesn't know who Jester is, and he was just trying to be safe. And Ford says, yeah, there might be something to that. But basically, Ford seems to have kind of given up on the whole Vandrin thing for now, based on this response. Ford then talks to Jester about the issue that he had one night in the past where he had a dream of Uk'otoa, and Uk'otoa was very angry with him, and Ford actually lost his powers the next day for some time. Jester and Ford talk about how they've basically taken on this new quest to try and remove the grasp of Uk'otoa and somehow get Ford into the good graces of someone else, like perhaps the Wild Mother, so that he can retain his powers and not be beholden to Uk'otoa and whatever it is that Uk'otoa wants from him. That night, when they all go to sleep, Ford has another one of his Uk'otoa dreams. In this, Uk'otoa is very clearly annoyed with Ford and frustrated with him. Uk'otoa says, "Don't run, find, take, consume." And then Uk'otoa says, "Return or consume." And he then grabs Ford up in his tendrils in the dream and eats him, basically. And he's basically saying, like, do what I tell you or I'm going to destroy you. Ford wakes up from this dream in a cold sweat, and the sword, he can no longer summon the sword. It is just leaning nearby. And so he goes and picks it up and dashes outside and starts to try and have a conversation with Uk'otoa, basically, where Ford attempts to threaten Uk'otoa and say that Uk'otoa needs him more than he needs Uk'otoa. However, his intimidation check of 23 fails to work on a god, and so Ford begins to drive the sword into his own sternum and cutting himself open, basically. He pushes it in pretty deep a couple times. However, his intimidation checks still don't ever exceed the 23, and nothing seems to happen. So then Ford withdraws the sword, spits out a gout of blood, and then holds the sword over the forge and threatens to throw it into the lava. His blood begins to drip down onto the lava, and a smoke billows up, unnatural smoke that completely encompasses him. And Ford stands there holding his sword out still with this smoke all around him and begins to feel some sense of peace. So he begins to take the sword away and decides better of it and just chucks it into the lava, where he watches it melt down into the lava and disappear. Ford checks to see if his powers are working, and they are not. He is powerless, and his sword has apparently melted in the lava. He goes to wake up his spiritual advisor, Caduceus Clay, who immediately heals the wound that he had self-inflicted, and they go out to investigate the forge. Caduceus looks and sees a little bit of melted metal still sinking down into the forge, and casts Detect Magic and does not see any magical essence coming from the sword, which, as far as Caduceus is aware, and he even asks Matt for clarification on this, that if it was a magical item, it should not have melted. So therefore, the weapon itself had lost its magic when Ford threw it in and melted it. Otherwise, it should not have melted. So Ford is now obviously quite ruffled, as he has no powers, and he fears that he will not get them back because he's obviously casting off Uk'otoa and trying to get away from him as best he can. However, all of Ford's powers, as far as he knows, came from that sword and came from Uk'otoa. They go back to sleep, and when they wake up the next morning, Ford confronts the entire Mighty Nein without his Vandrin accent that he's been using for most of the campaign, which he's only told Jester so far that the accent that he speaks in normally is not his own native accent, and he speaks to everyone plainly, tells them that he's lost his powers, tells them that he feels like he's a liability, and so they immediately start giving him any magical items that they can to provide him more utility in combat. So he's given the whip from Jester, Caleb gives him the glove, and he's handed a couple other items. I think Nott gives him a dagger, and so he's equipped with a few other items, and basically they try and kind of, like, you're not useless. But obviously Ford is now much less powerful given the fact that he's a spellcaster with no spells. They mention that one of the many traits that he has is simply his ability to speak and to sway people over to their side, and that even without his spells, he is far from useless and he's still a valuable member of the Mighty Nein. And Caduceus also mentions that, hey, we're just going to make the Star Razor and we'll get you a new sword, and Jester's talking about that we'll figure out something with the Wild Mother. And so basically they're saying, like, whatever, you don't have any powers right now, and yeah, that kind of sucks, but we'll figure this out and we'll get you back in fighting shape in no time. So the party goes ahead and gathers everything and begins to head back out again and to make this journey to Uthadurn, where they can find this person who can help them hopefully reforge the Star Razor and get Ford a new sword and hopefully get his groove back. And that's where the episode ends. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.